Everyone, welcome back to our weekly live stream. Today's topic is Mercury aspects to Pluto. And just give me a little hello here, just to confirm, as usual, that I am broadcasting and everything's flowing here. So before we jump in, I want to remind everyone that my training program begins this week. So this is the opportunity to enroll to join my training program. If you resonate with these teachings, this is an opportunity to study from the very beginning in the teachings of evolutionary astrology, as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green, through my own ongoing realization. It's a year-long program, and then the second year we do some deeper practice work as well. I also am available for sessions. I work with individuals, couples, and long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions as well. Okay, so let me just see. You got me. Okay, we're here. Okay, so today we're looking at Mercury aspects to Pluto. Let's take a moment to connect with what Mercury is all about and how actually Mercury and Pluto naturally work together. And then we'll go into the teachings. So Mercury corresponds to what we call the left brain. It's how we are linearly organizing our reality. The example that I often give is, I'm teaching here, I'm using words, you know the meaning of these individual words, but then streamed together, the words manifest within a sentence. And these sentences together form whole series of thoughts that convey particular ideas. What we're doing with a Mercury function is we're taking these individual pieces and we're streaming them together to build a greater structure of thought in our mind. We're forming a logical premise based on various pieces all put together. And what's interesting about it is it's both words equaling a sentence and then also several sentences conveying a particular stream of thought. And what's most meaningful about Mercury is, in theory, there's no end to the learning possibilities of this human experience. So you can take any number of existing data points, put them together, and formulate new insights, new ideas, new perspectives, new angles, new views on life. And you can kind of think of it as taking something apart infinitely, or adding any number of pieces together. For example, if you want to speak about and learn more, gather more data about the color nuances on my video and the different shades, you can do that. And you can identify an infinite number of data points. And what happens with Mercury is we're basically investigating reality, and we're giving names to the various experiences, pieces, sensations even, that manifest in experience. The names allow us to identify them, okay? Once we have a name for something, we can say this is a particular facet of experience. It's a data point, and it's concrete. This name implies something, and I'm able to convey it to you, and you're able to hear it and know exactly what I'm talking about. What's interesting about it is, of course, life itself. This is something Jeff Green pointed out. Names aren't inherently given, right? Like, life doesn't say, hi, I'm a hand, and I'm blue, and I'm gray. We give it that. So it's important to understand that within the Mercury function, we're actually not analyzing the wholeness of life as it is. We're actually taking the wholeness apart and kind of getting to know it through division. We're getting to know the completeness of reality by actually compartmentalizing it as much as we possibly can, so that we can then convey ideas and thoughts that bring it all together again. And you'll never ever with Mercury be able to arrive at a complete holistic understanding of all of reality, because reality is always going to be just beyond the infinite possibilities of bringing data points together. In other words, you can't logically and linearly come to a complete understanding of existence. It's whole. It is already, you know? So what we're doing with the Mercury function is we're, to the best that we can, perpetually always gathering more information, taking more of life apart and seeing more about it, understanding it, connecting more data points with more data points, building a more holistic and ever more inclusive superstructure of understanding in our minds. So it's always approaching a more holistic understanding, but never quite getting to a complete understanding. Because completion is Pisces, and just to offer that differential, the Mercury Gemini archetype squares Pisces Neptune, right? So there's that inherent tension between the two in the sense that you're never going to arrive at completion. So it's important to understand that when it comes to Mercury, it's really just about the learning process itself, right? You're never going to get there. One of the pitfalls with Mercury in general is the attempt to arrive at some sort of ultimate conclusivity with the mind, or scattering from one data point to another, trying to feverishly grab it all together. So if it's just about learning, Mercury then points to the unique curriculum in terms of what each soul is learning. And we have to ask that question. Why do we each have the unique curiosities and intrigues that we each have? Because for our soul program, for this evolutionary journey, and we start thinking about Pluto with Mercury in particular, we're going to have to ask the question, why on any particular soul path is any individual soul drawn to learn what they're drawn to learn about? Why are we gathering this kind of data? Why am I interested in this, right? And the interests with Mercury are never like, I'm just interested in one thing. Because there's no such thing as one thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, one thing will have many components, and inherently one thing will connect with many other things. That's what Mercury is. So if we're studying one thing, what's really happening is we're going to be researching many things to be able to understand this one thing better. And this fundamentally points back to how this learning journey and this ongoing expansion of knowledge and understanding, greater logical perspective of life and how it works, is really how we're able to understand our place in life. We're able to learn and grow a greater comprehension of existence. The ongoing learning journey allows for ideas to be communicated, to be shared, which affects our understanding of who we are. So a great an example for this is the idea of a map. If you have a map of a city, you can reference that map, and that map will say, okay, I know, even though I'm not walking there yet, I know that this map is going to provide a particular guidance system for where to go and where things are. It's a reference point, and it gives a framework, an intellectual framework through which I'm able to understand the environment that I'm in. It's a starting point. If I know that Main Street and Broadway cross each other at a certain point over there, I have a starting point from which I can understand, hey, come and meet me at the corner of Broadway and Main Street. Oh, I know where that is, okay? Come and meet me at Broadway. It's 2 blocks from Main Street. 2 blocks east? Yes, okay, got it. Right? Like, anything that we're able to map and categorize in our mind becomes a reference point from which we can then map and categorize more things. It allows us to learn about ourselves and to learn about others, to learn about life. It enables us to participate in experience. Without that Mercury function, there would be no capacity fundamentally to actually engage in this evolutionary journey and interact with life. So the learning journey ultimately serves towards a deeper ongoing realization. Now, when a deeper ongoing capacity to understand oneself and exist and cooperate and participate in life. Now, when we bring this to Pluto, it fundamentally says we're linking the Mercury function, how we're linearly organizing our reality, right, to our evolutionary work in this life, to evolutionary necessity. And this is going to say two things. There's a fundamental security that's going to be linked and associated with how I've organized my reality. I feel secure because I'm able to map everything, and I know where everything is. I can say, okay, this is how it works. This is the logical basis. We know in science and historically, we've had the mapping of the cosmos. And that mapping of the cosmos creates some kind of intellectual consistency and security. Now, if we're so addicted to that, if we're saying, I need that intellectual organization to be true, then we're going to feel emotionally confronted when new data points come in. The whole reality of being fixed and stuck on a particular logical construct says, for that individual soul relative to Pluto, Mercury, the very evolutionary journey is taking that soul beyond the limitations of their mind. So remember, with Pluto, we're always going to be dealing with the nature of psychological limitation, where we're holding on to what provides a sense of power. Right? We're fixating, focusing, concentrating Pluto. This creates a sense of power. This creates a sense of ultimate security. Or we're going to feel very disempowered relative to a sense of, I don't have that connection to my own power, to my own agency here. Or we'll feel entrapped. So it's all about the empowerment of the mind to think clearly and sharply and to be able to answer questions. How does life work? How does all of this stuff come together? Okay, so in this one modality, if we're fixed on having an intellectually organized version of reality and new data points are coming in, that will produce a sense of disempowerment relative to the core security patterns of Pluto. And cyclically, a soul might find themselves getting into conversations with other people that are more intellectually adept than themselves. They know more astrology, they know more astronomy, they ask better questions. Thus, their logical frameworks are always being poked. And so where they might otherwise feel secure, there's going to be a sense of, oh, everything that I've organized is actually getting shaken up. How the soul responds to that is of essence, right? It's very easy with Mercury Pluto, based on the security of having figured it out already, having it all kind of established, to use the power of communication and speech as a form of manipulation to create the validity of whatever one wants to be true, right? I'm going to prove that this is true. I'm certain of it. I'm going to be a better arguer. But are you really allowing yourselves to learn? So one of the biggest issues with Mercury Pluto, because of this fixations of security patterns, there can be a total unwillingness to learn. Because I don't want to get new information in to break down the constructs I've already created. Or if there's a willingness to evolve, there'll be a willingness to sort of die over and over again, to be able to reformulate one's understandings with the openness to new information that will have a deep penetrating effect. Now, we could have the experience of encountering knowledge or information that produces a deep sense of insecurity. I've already formed my conclusions. This is uncomfortable. Maybe it's a book or a teaching or a school of thought that actually elicits a deep sense of insecurity and weakness within the soul. Eventually, a soul is going to be drawn to face that particular line of thinking, perhaps to osmose it eventually, right? The osmosing of particular forms of thought or particular constructs of thought becomes a way of the soul including that within their own being. Right? They're osmosing, which is a Pluto word, this knowledge into their soul so they can deeply know and get to the core, get to the bottom line of it. But until there's that willingness to kind of get to the core of it, it might be seen as a threat. So what very often happens with Mercury-Pluto aspects is at various points in the soul's life, they're going to be psychically mesmerized and fascinated and deeply drawn to particular thoughts, ideas, or realms, or constructs, or paradigms of information, where eventually they will be impelled to absorb it and go deeply into it so they can extract the underlying understanding. And this could even be on the level of, I want to be able to use my mind sharply. I want to speak and communicate in a way that is powerful and of essence, because that Mercury Pluto will also speak to how one is able to articulate and communicate and convey ideas. Am I scattered and all over the place? Or do I carry the power of my own soul in my words? So it can be, drawn to strengthening one's ability to speak or communicate or learn. Just as much as a soul will find themselves psychically deeply repelled by particular modalities or realms of information because it threatens that internal sense of psychological insecurity, that I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have the ability to learn or to understand. Okay, so that's one expression of it. We're also going to be looking at Mercury Pluto from the point of view of investigation. The idea here is we're not going to be settling on a superficial, shallow understanding of our reality. And so there's a draw for the soul to investigate and go very deeply into understanding the logical basis for phenomenal existence. How do things actually work? I'm going to ask deeper questions. And that impelling need to ask deeper questions or to take things apart and investigate might actually push up against certain taboos. One thing Jeff Green describes when he speaks about Mercury Pluto in his book is just like what the nature of taboo is. Okay? It's a very interesting thought. I've never thought of this before, but taboo implies limitation, right? A cultural taboo says, oh, don't go there. That's what a taboo is. And so the Mercury Pluto is like, don't go there. What's there? I want to know. There's something on the other end of this investigation that's going to have a deep impact upon my own knowledge. I'm going to know myself differently. I'm going to know the world differently. I'm going to be able to interact and think about the world differently. The reality of Mercury Pluto, it's so permeating because we have to understand that the thoughts we're thinking, the things we're thinking of all the time, the information we're consuming, right? It's easy to fall into a sort of rut of conditioned patterning when it comes to the Mercury level of consciousness, right? Like we just have the same thoughts over and over and over again. You can have a conversation with someone and not learn anything because you're not necessarily listening for something new. You can be thinking in your own head the same thoughts over and over and over again, but not necessarily getting anywhere deep. Okay? So the idea of going to the taboo is like, oh, that's uncomfortable, or I'm not allowed to think of that, but what's there? There's a push with Mercury Pluto to actually get beyond the limited patterns of thought that the soul is already familiar with. And it could be as deep as, I'm not allowed to think that, or I'm not allowed to say that, right? You can be interfacing with the taboo around speech, or I'm not allowed to read that, or that book is heresy, right? That book is hypocrisy. I can't read that, but I want to read it. What does Ayn Rand say, or what did that banned book say? To go where the world or society or other people, however it might manifest for that individual soul, says, oh, that's not okay. There can be a deep, to look at it entirely from the Pluto point of view, there can be a deep interest in wanting to identify and communicate and take apart anything related to psychology or sexuality or any aspects of life that relate to the deeper dimensions of desire and addiction and compulsion, right? So, I mean, I've met with many people, clients who have strong Mercury Pluto. They write about sexuality, right? Or they research it. Or they're psychologists, but they're all about researching and gathering data that relates to different psychological dynamics, right? You could be an astrologer. And for you, learning astrology would fundamentally be about investigating and being able to identify Mercury, right? Give names to different psychological patterns and dynamics and why they happen. And of course, that can be understood at various levels of consciousness, right? You can answer a question, and even the question itself that's being asked and how it's being asked and how it's formulated at various levels of consciousness. And let's look at that for a moment. Perception corresponds to Pluto, and I spoke about this during the intro talk, which I highly recommend. Perception's Pluto on the level of perceptions born from desire, okay? So depending on what our soul program is, what we're here to work out, what we're desiring, we're going to perceive a reality as a mirror to the internal reality that we're actually trying to work out. And the example that I often give is walking into a party and you see someone dancing with someone else. You might have a reaction of feeling jealousy. You might have a reaction of feeling left out. But your friend next to you will see, oh, cool, they're partying. I want to dance too, right? They're seeing the same event, but they're thinking very different thoughts. Because reality is going to be seen and internalized in a very different way for each individual soul according to their program. If one soul is working out with their own insecurities and they have desires for being liked and seen and recognized, they might feel insecure when they see other people having a good time. So that's perception on the level of Pluto. We understand psychologically perception emanates from desire. And we're not going to see anything in our reality that isn't born from the desires that we're working out within our soul. You can't separate the two. It's a very important thing to understand how really that's how reality is, in a sense, more of a mirror to what's inside of us than a fact, okay? But we can also think of perception on the level of Mercury, and it's a little bit of a different dimension. Perception on the Mercury level is more just like the world that we're perceiving and the names that we're calling, right? But when you combine the two, we're going to get very, very interested in the nature of our perceptions and the names that we're calling things and how we're organizing it and classifying it. Because Mercury perceptions are going to be logical, they're going to be organized, they're going to be sound. But being logical and well organized doesn't mean they're true. It doesn't mean there aren't more data points or perspectives to consider. It just means it's logical. So the questions we're asking and the kinds of data and information and the ways that we're answering these questions are actually going to speak very much to the soul's program. And let me give you this example. Let's say your spouse comes home late. Let's say you're struggling with your own distrust, right? Can I trust this person? Are they cheating on me? Like, what's really going on, right? So you're going to ask some questions. Where were you? Why didn't you call me? Who were you with? What did you do? You're gathering data, or you're building in your mind a framework for understanding what this person just did, but it's rooted in an underlying psychological need, Pluto, to resolve something, right? So the questions that are being asked are not purely objective and scientific. They're impelled from a certain psychological dynamic inside. And this can become the trap of Mercury Pluto. There can be an underlying insecurity and suspicion where in order to feel secure, I'm needing to probe, I'm needing to get to the core. Let me give you a couple examples of this, right? There can be a sense of vulnerability. Other people are going to use deception or lie to me or use duplicity. And if I'm not really sharp with my mind, I'm going to be tricked, right? So I've learned not to become a victim by asking really good questions, right? Really getting to the core. But that can become living in a jaded state of distrust, right? I don't trust what people are telling me because I'm on guard against being hurt. And so then there's going to be a perception of people aren't giving me all of the information. People are withholding information, right? Or to use another example, you can be in experiences where there's a need to ask really sharp questions. Like, let's say you're a journalist or you're an investigator, you're a detective, and you've developed through that line of work, and you've been drawn to that line of work in order to develop a really sharp and acute mind, right? This is like the Sherlock Holmes, like gathering all of the data, being able to piece it all together and kind of get to the bottom line to solve the problem. And that can become an issue if the mind is always sort of in that place of there's something I'm needing to solve. What's really going on here? What's happening? What's the bottom line, right? So dealing with issues of suspicion and distrust can definitely come up with Mercury Pluto, just as much as the ways that the soul might use the power of their own mind to actually manipulate other people. I'm going to be duplicitous. I'm going to speak certain words that are going to convey a certain idea in order to bring forth a certain appearance, but I'm not actually being honest, but maybe I'm being factual. And that's the thing with Mercury. Being factual doesn't necessarily mean you're being honest. You can use data and facts and information in order to convey a certain logical conclusion, and it's all manipulative, right? So we can be very sensitive to that in others, or we can actually be doing that ourselves. We see this all the time with news media being a Mercury thing, right? It's very easy to take data, but selectively take data and convey particular stories and images that the mind will be able to internalize and form. Like, we can manipulate the stories that people are creating by the speech that we're using. If we're wanting to direct their mind in a particular way, that's almost a mind control Mercury Pluto trick. Okay, let me take a look at my notes here. So yeah, let me just speak a little bit to the idea of compulsiveness. Compulsion here is the need to know. So the underlying insecurity of not having enough information, not understanding, not being able to be strong enough, not being able to answer the questions, that underlying compulsiveness can result in always gathering new information, right? Like, I'm insecure, so I'm compulsive, and I'm needing to, jump on the first thought to get more information about this. I'm needing to enroll in this course because that's going to give me something that I don't know. I'm needing to have this conversation with this person who I'm perceiving as having some kind of power or knowledge or information. That state of compulsivity can become a frenetic pattern of jumping from one idea to another, but not necessarily being grounded enough within one's soul to actually extract anything of value. So the idea here is the compulsiveness, and this is an issue with Pluto in general, where we have the dichotomy between commitment and a fear of entanglement. There's often going to be a need to actually focus on one particular, you can think of it as a paradigm of thought, a particular thesis or a particular topic, right? Or one school of thought, one teaching, one teacher, one, take one class, or pick one topic, right? One study, one training program. There's often a resistance to that because of not wanting to be limited by all the questions and all the things that I do not yet understand. And so there's a need to actually not become disempowered by way of being able to access information, however I need to and want to. But actually, in committing to one particular avenue of learning, that becomes a reference point from which all other learnings can be then referenced, right? But that commitment means I'm going to face my psychological limitation. That's why the soul wouldn't commit. Right? By committing, I'm going to face the part of me that needs to know or feels weak because I don't know, or is going to feel insecure relative to all that others do know. And so I'm going to be tempted to want to jump from one thing to the next, but that's going to take me away from my own soul. So for many Pluto Mercury people, there's a need to kind of refine and simplify and focus on less information, less learning, less expanding into all different areas, and become more single focused on what am I trying to learn. And having that focus point means new data and new information can come in, but I'm not losing my soul to it. And this really means getting to the bottom line, focusing the mind. What is my learning goal? What's my learning intention? If we know that, if we have our thesis, it's easy to use that as our bottom line and not be distracted. Now, the other expression of that would be a soul that is actually by their nature very single focused. They're not going to waste words. They're not going to speak to you and chit chat and gossip, which are all Mercury things, because that's a depletion of my soul energy. Right? That's a depletion of life force. There's a social pressure to have a conversation, to engage, to talk, to chit chat, right? And that can be an issue with Mercury Pluto. Oh, I don't want to not belong. I want to be able to interact, right? Or I want to be able to, adopt to this person. So we're always kind of losing our power to each social interaction, but we're not grounded in our soul. So the ability to actually stay centered in one's soul vibration and not just chit chat or gossip or have meaningless or empty or shallow conversations. So that would be the ability to ask questions that are truly of essence, right? Get to the heart of the matter. Words that are being spoken that actually carry power and strength to them. And not talking about things that have no interest. Right? So these souls are going to be focusing their mind and using it in a way where they're growing and deepening their intellectual understanding of reality in a way that actually serves their own soul growth. And that's a very natural expression of Pluto as an evolutionary process. There's a narrowing that happens with Pluto. We lose our life force energy to less content, less experience. We become less and less focused and fixated on more on the outside. And we become more oriented towards what is truly of essence to evolve. What's truly of essence. And there becomes this awareness with Mercury Pluto. If I really want to evolve and grow, I'm going to have to focus my mind. Right? Just beating around the bush isn't going to get me anywhere. Just having conversations. Slight little plug here. If you've been studying astrology and you're interested in it, but you've never really committed to a deep, full-on study, you won't be committing to that greater evolutionary potential that you have with that Mercury Pluto. So the commitment to truly get focused is that sort of matured realization. In order to evolve, I need to make the choice to get to the bottom line, get to what is of essence. And that means getting more serious about my own thoughts, right? Is the data that I'm consuming helpful? Scrolling on social media, are the conversations I'm having, are they relevant? What am I doing with my mind? So one final dimension of Mercury Pluto is from a spiritual point of view. You can think of Mercury Pluto, and I often quote Ramana Maharshi just in terms of his perspective on self-inquiry. He speaks of it as using a toothpick to get at a splinter. Right? So the idea of using the mind to kind of go deeper into self-knowledge. So it's not becoming consumed by the fluctuations of the mind, but learning how to focus the mind to kind of get underneath into our true self. And that's where things like any kind of single-pointed concentration, be it a mantra or a mandala or a particular technique, Mercury corresponds to techniques as well. Coordination and techniques as well as data or thoughts are all Mercury. That has the effect of concentrating our life force energy towards a particular point of realization. So it's kind of where through the very single focus concentration, everything opens up. And again, that also becomes a point where through inner knowledge, new knowledge and experience actually has a place to be referenced. Versus if the mind isn't focused, then there's always going to be some sort of scattered movement in all kinds of direction. And the danger with Mercury Pluto is we can adopt thoughts or lines of thinking that are inherently distrusting or rooted in a need for power, right? So we can use our mind and think thoughts that actually extract power from other people, right? So casting spells, black magic, things like that, right? Using the mind to get power. And that's a false form of psychological empowerment, but it's one form of using the mind to concentrate, but it's actually coming from a deep sense of weakness and the belief that one needs to manipulate in order to find power. So the true invulnerability of Mercury Pluto is the stability of being rested in one's soul and the agency that one has over their mind and where they direct their thoughts. So what they say, what they're learning, and how they're orienting their thoughts and their attention to affect true growth is where their power truly rests. Okay. So I felt to read one quote. Actually, you know what? I kind of paraphrased this, so I'm not going to read the quote. Let me take this moment to see if there are any questions in the comments, and then I'll look at some interesting chart examples. Okay. So, a good idea for your questions, you can probably experiment with putting your questions in caps so it sort of like stands out for me. That'd be a good idea. Let me share one more thought. Okay, so, Mercury, I mentioned, is the map, and it's how we're going to map and be able to give context to our reality so that it helps us to interact and relate to each other. When you think about the map that we have in our minds of just how life works, for the most part, we're going to have a lot of hazy thoughts that are just sort of there. Right? Thoughts that we're having that we're not really thinking of having, just sort of abstractly. And here's an example. You're driving in your car and you have your phone telling you where to go. So you're not aware of the environment, right? You're not aware of your surroundings. You're not actually concentrating on the street names and the landmarks and things like that. You're focusing on the phone telling you where to go. The experience of putting the phone away and actually paying attention to the environment, actually building in your mind a framework for mapping and understanding where you are through concentration and experience, through perception of your environment. That's just a great metaphor for understanding how this Mercury function works and how it works with Pluto, where we can actually be out of touch with our own soul, right? Do we believe that we have the ability to learn something that we care about and think of it, concentrate on it, and ask the questions that we need to ask in order to truly learn it? Or are we just expecting that it's going to be given to us, and then if we don't understand it, we'll just say, well, whatever, there are other things to think about, right? Like, we're not necessarily challenged in this day and age to develop mental concentration capacities. So we can function really well and sort of have a very ambiguously mapped world without ever really concentrating our mind. We can succeed in life and do all kinds of things without really focusing our attention. And so there's a growth with Mercury Pluto in developing the capacity for concentration and actually realizing I have the ability to grow and learn and understand that which I want to through concentration. And it really comes back to first fundamentally knowing that and taking the time to really come from that place. What is the question that I want to ask? What is the thing that I want to know? If you're teaching a class, you kind of pose those questions. What am I going to teach? How am I going to teach it? And how am I going to know that this teaching was effective? So it's that level of concentration and power in the mind that is really important with Mercury Pluto. Okay. Pluto in Virgo with Mercury in Aquarius. What house system do I use? I use Porphyry house system. But these teachings, they can work for any house system, right? This is a basic understanding that can be applied to whatever house system you personally work with. Okay, so let's work on some charts here. Okay, so the first is George Gershwin. For those that don't know, George Gershwin wrote Rhapsody in Blue with his brother. Rhapsody in Blue is just like, early 1900s, brilliant piece of music. Just brilliant piece of music. And what's amazing about it is it encompasses all different kinds of instruments and styles and draws from different nationalities, draws from different cultures. So it has a lot of jazz, it has ragtime, which was much more within the Black community at that time. But it has a lot of European influence as well. But the musicality and the intricacy of the music was profound. It's a profoundly and beautiful, complex piece, and the rhythms aren't traditional, aren't normal, right? The rhythms are much more non-Western, right? More of the African style, right? That was not of the typical white European way of thinking of music. But then the orchestration, the organization had the brilliance of sort of the European composition style as well. And so it's drawing like the best from all these different cultural areas, but so meticulously, brilliantly put together. You can tell this person had a lot of technical skill, but was very open and expansive in his mind. So I just think this is brilliantly expressed in this Mercury square to Pluto. I mean, this is a perfect square. It's like just the very beginning of a first quarter square. We can tell first, this is a sort of a knack for harmony, that Mercury with Neptune in Gemini in the 7th. I mean, that's the listening. That's the being able to osmose and draw in other people's ways, right? But then, the psychology of listening is Libra, 7th house. The physiology of hearing, this is something Jeff Green taught, is Mercury Gemini. Hearing and the ability to hear something new is a Gemini Mercury thing, the ability to actually hear another person for their personness. Right? What are you saying to me? That's a Libra thing, listening. But you're combining both. It's a very astute harmonic mind that can really hear detail. And Mercury and Virgo in the 9th also being, if you think of, 9th house as being spirituality or different facets of culture, it's the ability to draw from different races, different groups of people that come from completely different spiritual cultures even, and to take it apart and to integrate it and synthesize it together into something new. And we're always going to find that with Mercury. You're always going to find yourself experiencing something new that you've never experienced and seeing and thinking something new. That's the point. If we're listening and we're not just repeating our own thoughts, if we're in a Mercury-Pluto possessive place, right, where we're needing to actually already have it all mapped together, then we're not going to hear something new. We're not even going to think a new thought. Our mind will just hear the same thing over and over and over again. And that's actually a Mercury-Pluto thing. You can be talking to someone and you're just interrupting because you're only interested in your own logical processes and you're actually using the conversation to work out your own thoughts. But you're not wanting to actually get something new in your mind there. So if there's openness, you're going to hear something new. And I think George Gershwin's a great example of literally hearing something new and the ability to craft and put something together with profound detail. Okay, so let's look at the next chart example. Kurt Cobain, another brilliant musician, but a very different example. So Kurt Cobain has a Pluto-Mercury opposition actually pretty much on the cusp of his ascendant-descendant axis. Right? This is one of those examples where I would consider Pluto to effectively be on the cusp of the, you may as well interpret it to being on the first. The angles, in my experience, sort of draw that planet in. Mercury, it's a degree and a half. And either way, we got that strong Virgo, Pisces, 6th house, 12th house being emphasized here. This totally speaks to themes of inferiority and superiority, the need for freedom and sort of the inner perfectionism of that Virgo Pluto, and then being sort of lost, losing myself, getting stuck in another person's world. And we have a lot of Pisces 7th house here. And Mercury on the cusp of that. I think this Mercury is in many ways, you can see it in his lyrics, working out his own internal sense of imperfection. And even working out his own sense of being entrapped or being stuck. And there's some lyrics that I want to read to you. And that just really beautifully expresses this. So, smells like teen spirit. With the lights out, it's less dangerous. Here we are now, entertain us. I feel stupid and contagious. Pisces Virgo, right? Here we are now, entertain us. There's a lyric, this is one of his favorite songs called Drain You. One baby to another says, I'm lucky to have met you. I don't care what you think unless it's about me. It is now my duty to completely drain you. I travel through a tube and end up in your infection, chew your meat for you, pass it back and forth in a passionate kiss from my mouth to yours. There's this tortured soul sense in his lyrics. So what is he doing though? This Mercury in Pisces in the 6th is working out these deeper existential senses of being fundamentally flawed, dirty. My physicality is almost like a sin. It's something that he's working out within his soul in the sense of, I'm wanting to cleanse myself of something that feels inherently bad and wrong and sinful and dirty. And all of his lyrics are like deep cathartic expressions of working out this darkness in his own mind. And not just his lyrics. What is his hallmark? His music. And this is a thing about Mercury too. Like, Mercury isn't implicitly about music. It isn't. But chord patterns and mathematics and techniques are. And so people that have unique styles of playing that are putting together chord patterns that are just mathematically very unique, that communicate certain ideas, right? Like there's the feel of something, and then there's which is Venusian and even Neptunian, then there's the actual communication, a message. So working with certain patterns, right? Like he has like these I'll just play it right now so you can hear exactly what I'm talking about. And this is a helpful reference for really getting just like the way Mercury works. Let's see if I can get the chords correctly. It's like, see what I'm saying? Yeah, A major. It's eerie, right? You feel it's eerie. So we feel something, but I'm communicating something. Our mind is able to identify, like, that's a little bit eerie. Versus like, right? That's joyful and playful. So chords and patterns have their own ways of communicating ideas and thoughts. And that's a very cool thing to notice when it comes to Mercury in general. Okay. So let's go to George Lucas. Oh yeah, good point. That his music is called grunge, right? Don't you get like that Pisces Virgo in grunge? So it's so there, right? Okay. Let me see this question here. How does Mars act upon Mercury? Oh, that's too much of a detailed question. Maybe we'll save that for the training program. Mars, let's wait until we get to Mars to work with Pluto together. But obviously all of these planets are integrated together. You can't separate them apart, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Okay. So George Lucas, note he has Mercury retrograde in Taurus in the 12th, really tight square to Pluto, in Leo in the 4th. This is like, this elicits in me the image of a boy sitting by himself with his imagination, right? And that retrograde is single focus, just the rich imagination. Mercury and Taurus, you're creating a whole story that is self-contained. Like the Star Wars universe is a self-contained universe. It's not just like a story, it's a whole complete picture that he's created. And it goes far beyond just the movies that he's created as well. There's a whole complete story that includes stories and backgrounds before the movies that we've even seen and all those things. So it's very much elicitive of the imagination and being inspired and creating something that is complete within itself. But there's that concentration of the mind and that deep sense of identification. Like this is, again, for him, a deep emotional catharsis too, that Pluto in the 4th house. This is speaking to something deeply within his own soul. I just wanted to highlight that, the power and the focus of this soul and the concentration of his mind to create something that detailed, that focused, that complete with Mercury Pluto square here. And that Mercury's with Venus too. Again, just think about Venus in terms of the nuanced beauty, like the dress code, the way things look and sound and feel, right? Like Mercury's telling the story, and now Venus is like painting it with color, giving it so much texture and actual tactile experience. That Mercury Pluto together, both squaring Pluto, Mercury Venus together squaring Pluto, is just really embodied. It's very embodied. It's rich. You can feel it, taste it, smell it, talk about it. Everything's there, right? So that's just a very illustrative example of a focused mind in that way. A couple more examples. Jon Stewart. Okay. For those that don't know Jon Stewart, he is a comedian, also a political commentator. His career has taken many different spins. He's had The Daily Show for many years, recently started up again, stopped for a while. And the idea was using comedy also as social commentary. And he would interview a lot of people, but he's really known for being a very good orator, speaking truth, confronting different people with, really good questions. In all of his interviews, his skill set, I would say, is the ability to respect and hear other people, but also speak truth and, bring out more nuance through conversation. He's been an advocate for people who, after 9/11 in the United States, first responders got cancer from the smoke, and veterans as well, basically where various people in need weren't being protected by the government, right? Their basic medical care needs weren't being provided. So he's been an advocate for them, right? So you just look at this chart. We have Mercury, Sun. This is a very strong Sun-Mercury conjunction, squaring Pluto. So this is all about a mind that is expansive. This is, in an individuated stage of consciousness, Mercury in Sagittarius is going to be very worldly, okay? It's going to know a lot about global politics. It's going to be reading and learning about international issues and building a very inclusive, holistic mindset around things, right? That's how Mercury in Sag functions in the individuated stages of consciousness. Philosophically, it's going to be very smart, very developed, very adept. And it's going to have a lot of knowledge around sort of the international global issues that are important, and it's going to formulate a larger cosmological understanding that can kind of bring everything together. Like, that's the hallmark of Mercury and Sag, the ability to synthesize and bring it all together in a way that it makes sense. Of course, there could be a lot of dogmatism, right? I'm right, you're wrong in Mercury and Sag as well. So I just wanted to point out the power of his voice, and sort of what he's done his whole life has been political commentary through comedy, which is also a Sagittarius thing, squaring Pluto, interviewing with people, talking to people. And also one of the things that he does, what he's known for as one of his comedy routines in The Daily Show, is showing media clips from like mainstream media and pointing out the hypocrisy and the absurdity or the weakness in people's logical frameworks. So Mercury, Pluto, being able to point out other people's arguments and sort of, in this case, point out its weakness by way of making a joke out of it. So if you're not familiar with him, just check out one of his anything, and you'll see how he uses his mind to get to the bottom line, to argue points. And I think what's essential here with this Pluto in the 7th house, the core dynamic is, because just take Mercury and Sag squaring Pluto and Virgo in general. If I was meeting in a natal chart reading, what would I be paying attention to? Make sure when you're talking to someone, you're not overly concerned with being believed and understood by them. Right? You can lose your power by needing to be understood and wanting to be accepted. The trauma of not being understood with Sag, and then the subservience of Virgo in the 7th house. Oh, I want to make sure you like me. Am I agreeable to you? Right? This is about respecting people, not being superior or inferior, but staying true to your mind, staying true to your beliefs, true to your thoughts, and communicating the truth, but staying true to yourself while also listening and respecting other people. That would be the expression of strength, not needing to be agreeable, but standing in one's truth. And of course he has, I'm not painting him in a perfect picture, he has his own shadow dynamics, but these are the things to tune into. Do we lose our power in conversation? Or conversely, am I needing to be superior? Right? Am I needing to be right and make other people, Virgo 7th house, inferior? These are the things that I would tune into. Okay, Galileo. I had the thought, I wonder where Galileo's Mercury is. Lo and behold, Mercury Pluto conjunction with the sun in Pisces. And so what's unique about this is it squares Neptune in Gemini and Uranus in Sag. Okay, there's so much here around ideas and thoughts and ways of thinking and ways of mapping, literally mapping and organizing reality, that it became universal. Pisces, Neptune, like it sort of opened up the doors for everyone, but also pushed against the prevailing beliefs and dogmas of the time, Uranus and Sag, okay? So this is a soul that basically took our thinking and said, there's a lot more than what we've known. He just opened the doors wide. Let me just read to you a couple things that Galileo actually did. Where's that? Here. He, with a telescope, he didn't invent it, but he used it. He found craters and mountains on the moon. He discovered the phases of Venus, noticing that actually Venus had different crescent phases just like the moon. But the geometry of these phases would only be explained if Venus was moving around the sun rather than Venus moving around the earth. This undermined the idea that everything in the heavens revolved around the earth. Jupiter's moons. The planet Jupiter was accompanied by 4 tiny satellites which moved around it. Of course, we found more since then, but he was the first to discover the moons. And the stars of the Milky Way. The Milky Way was not just a band of misty light. He noticed that it's made up of thousands of individual stars. And more. Right? Here's a quote. "I've never met a man so ignorant that I couldn't learn something from him." Look at that. Pisces, Mercury, right? In the 7th house. There's an underlying openness and universality to learn. I can learn from anyone. I've never met a man so ignorant that I could. This is like an unconditional love expression of Mercury in Pisces in the 7th house with Pluto. I can learn from anyone. There's a deep openness to others here. All truths are easy to understand once they are discovered. The point is to discover them. Mathematics is the key and the door to the sciences. So just really focusing on this Pluto-Mercury, the idea is the concentration. I want to discover, I want to understand more. Right, that's this whole trip here is understanding. Right, Mercury, Pluto squaring that Sag-Gemini axis. I want to understand how this world works. The key to understand is to be able to map and gather more data, observe things, discover more things, and thus when I discover something, I'm seeing it, but then I'm giving it names and I'm classifying it, and I'm building a greater framework to understand how it all interconnects with everything else in life. So, concentrated mind, focus. Again, very often Mercury, Pluto will express as sort of like a specialized focus where either the soul develops this at a certain point or they're sort of forced to kind of narrow out the distractions to really understand that in order to grow, I'm going to have to concentrate on what's of essence. And that will affect deeper soul evolution. Who's my last chart here? Oh, Barbara Streisand. So she has Mercury in Taurus in the 2nd house, squaring Pluto. So here's another interesting example of kind of like understanding the nature of Mercury. She's known for her unique voice. And of course, Taurus, 2nd house, is all about the voice itself. But we're also looking at Mercury here, squaring to Pluto in the 4th house, as well as, note there's a strong square to Chiron in the moon here. There's that whole issue where she forgot the lyrics on stage once and she was really embarrassed by that. Right? Lyrics are Mercury. Singing is voice, song, grace, Venus, Taurus. But the identification with the power of her own voice through the art, through the words and through even the tone, the sound. And I think, I don't know so much about her, so I don't want to speak more than I can actually do competently. But what I actually wanted to point out here is Mercury and Taurus can correspond to how communication is occurring through the tone, the nuance of voice, right? Like, I can sing, 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 sing. I don't know what note that is. That's like a sing, sing. That's a C note. But it's not just a C note. Sing. there's a vibrato, there's a tone, there's an octave, right? And so voice itself, and the as a medium of communication is also, just like I was speaking about with Kurt Cobain, is also a medium of communication. And seeing that strong Mercury with such a strong, powerful voice, that was interesting for me to note. Because that Mercury Pluto is a very penetrating voice that's communicating a very strong idea through that voice as well. Okay. All right, so this completes all of my example. Let's see if there are any final. I'm gonna have to look into. I feel like I should have listened to Barbara Streisand sing a little bit for me to have more of a personal direct experience. I don't love talking about charts that I don't know so much. So I'm gonna actually have to commit myself to hear her sing a little bit, and I'll post something in the comments so we can also get that. In my school of thought, do I feel sextiles and quincunxes are impactful? So I'll say two things. In the way that I think of it, I focus less on the actual aspect and more fundamentally on the phasal relationship. Because the phasal relationship actually indicates where two planets are within a whole cycle. And then within that, if there are certain aspects manifesting, that's going to imply a very particular intention for experience, right? So it's concentrated, but I'm a lot more interested in the phase than just kind of going straight to the aspect. So, and that's not so much what I'm teaching in these series, but you can learn that in my training program. In the Association of Evolutionary Astrologers, there's a free intro talk that I did with Kristen Fontana on that as well. And we're currently doing a class series. And then in terms of sort of the intensity of these aspects, well, yeah, sextile and quincunx won't be as intense, or quincunxes. Squares, oppositions, and even trines are a lot more strong. Sextile is less strong, but it's there. The way that I work with those aspects, especially when it comes to Pluto, is it's really more about understanding whether it's a harmonious or easy aspect or angular and hard aspect. It's an evolutionary necessity. So there might be a lot less catalyzing or triggering experience, but there's still that need to do that evolutionary work, and that work can still be resisted, and there can actually still be challenges that arise nonetheless. So, for example, I have a Mercury Pluto sextile. My Mercury is at the very end of Sag, and my Pluto is in the very beginning of Scorpio. So this is a crescent phase sextile, just before 60 degrees. I have the ability for deep concentration, right? That's what that sextile is, right? The ability to focus the mind and kind of get to the bottom line. But it's easy for me to be lazy about it, right? To not necessarily prepare as much as I could, and to kind of just use my Sagittarius energy to talk my way through things, right? But I find when I really prepare for a talk or a class or anything, and I ground myself in the vibration of things first, not so much like reading my notes, but just like getting down and kind of dropping into it, it allows my Mercury mind to sort of focus and drop into my soul, where the knowledge itself is I'm touching base with the wealth of knowledge inside, and I'm allowing my words to come from that place. Like I feel the most grounded when I really take the time to do that. And the challenge with a Mercury sextile to Pluto can be a little bit more scattered, right? But not necessarily as cataclysmic as if it was a square or an opposition, things like that. Listen to Barbara sing People. Okay, there you go. I will listen to her sing People. Maybe Lynn, you can just post it in the comments for me and you can do that and then I can just listen to it. Okay. Would retrograde Mars or Pluto change the nature of your thorough descriptions? Did you mean Mercury? So Mercury retrograde, I'll start by this. The archetype of retrograde itself, on its most basic level, says for whatever reason the soul is wanting to concentrate more and narrow out and decondition from the experiences or conditioned ways of being that aren't relevant or necessary any longer. So Mercury retrograde can express many different ways for each individual soul according to their soul context. It's not a one-size-fits-all. But in the most basic way, Mercury retrograde says the soul's really learning how to use their mind in a much more relevant way. So oftentimes there's going to be within Mercury retrograde a certain point where the soul becomes single focused on these are the things that I'm really getting into and letting everything else go. Right? And how they learn and how they're approaching the knowledge is going to be very relevant to their own soul program. But they need to be able to claim that and often let a lot of distractions go. That's one of many possibilities. If you're combining Mercury retrograde with Pluto, retrograde or not, that itself is going to further emphasize in a general way the need for concentration. Right? Perhaps the disempowerment, perhaps the scatterness can also be emphasized just as much as the need to kind of concentrate more on get to the essence. The gift of retrograde is it accelerates evolutionary growth because we become more single focused, aware of the need to kind of do something differently. Right? So the gift here can be the possibility of focusing more intently on what is truly relevant to learn and to be focusing on in this life, because of that retrograde function inducing within the soul a deeper awareness of I need to decondition from some kind of old past. Check out my retrograde class series. I'll post that in the description too, or in the links in the comments. I have a class on each retrograde planet that I taught, and you can buy the whole series or just an individual planet, and I go very deep into each individual planet. So yeah, you can just use a reference point as retrograde in general is intended to accelerate evolutionary growth through the deconditioning process. That's a general reference point for understanding it. See the movie Funny Girl. Okay, yeah. See, I'm so curious to know about her voice. That's what I want to know about. Yeah. Okay, everyone. Once again, check out my training program. I'm available for individual sessions and relationship readings and longer soul-to-soul companionship sessions. Check all of it out on my website, arimoshe.com. Thank you for joining me. We will continue next week with Venus aspects to Pluto. Bye.